Welcome to America with Lloyd Chapman and Bruce DeTorres. It is Thursday, January 2nd, 2025. Hello, and how are you today, Lloyd?
I'm good. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
2025.
I'm excited to talk to you. You have a couple things top of mind. Hit me with it, please.
All right. We cannot allow foreign governments to lobby Congress. That's got to stop. It's now come out that Ukraine lobbied Congress, and I'm guessing that they probably used some of the money that we gave them the first time to lobby Congress to get more money, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of that we just got to stop that. We cannot allow foreign governments to influence our Congress. We gave so much money in foreign aid that when the hurricanes hit the South, we didn't have money to rescue hurricane victims.
Yeah.
That's just stupid. Nobody would agree with that. Nobody in America go, oh yeah, but Ukraine needs more tanks. We have to let those people drown, in the Gulf Coast, right?
Yeah.
No, American tax dollars need to be used in America. So at some point in time, this country needs to adopt legislation that prohibits foreign countries like Ukraine from lobbying Congress. It just makes sense. Anyway, we'll talk about that more some other time. The main thing we'll talk about today is why Republicans hate small businesses. For 40 years, Republicans have hated small businesses and federal small business programs. We'll talk about that today.
Hmm.
I don't know why. I'd love to talk to some of these people and ask them what's your problem with that, right?
Hmm.
My guess is that the Pentagon is pressuring Congress and presidents, to close the SBA because the Pentagon doesn't like federal small business programs. Federal law mandates that a minimum of 23% of all federal contracts go to small businesses. That makes sense since 99.9% of all U.S. firms are small businesses, as I say, repeatedly. And those small businesses create about 98% of all net new jobs. So it makes sense. It's logical. It's smart, to make sure that small businesses get at least 23%. But for some reason, the Pentagon, doesn't like that. The Pentagon prime contractors don't like that. And I think that's probably the force behind this never-ending movement to kill federal small business programs. I knew a guy that was pretty good friends with Bill Clinton, and he was over, I think, the SB Office of Advocacy, Jerry Glover. He told me a story that Bill Clinton called him into the Oval Office and said, I'm under a lot of pressure to close the SBA. Every president is under pressure to close the SBA. It's this little tiny agency, right, with a little teeny tiny Mickey Mouse budget, and yet there's huge. I bet there's more pressure to close the SBA than there is to find out where all this money's missing at the Pentagon, right?
Hmm.
But it's the Pentagon, I think, that's behind this anti-small business campaign. The Cato Institute wants to end all federal small business programs. The Heritage Foundation wants to end all small business programs. I found a story on the Heritage Foundation's website from 1984 about closing the SBA. So I want to try to convince people that that's just a bad idea. 99.9% of all U.S. companies are small businesses. The Small Business Act of 1953 is the largest economic stimulus program in history for the American people, for the middle class.
Hmm.
And that's what the SBA administers. It's crazy. They'll say, we need to close it to save money. I've heard that. Obama even tried that, right? Biden increased the budget for the IRS by $80 billion. That would run the SBA for 100 years. So the SBA budget is 1/10 of just the raise that Biden gave the IRS, right? But yeah, the SBA is a very important federal agency. It should be one of the largest agencies of government. That
Hmm.
agency administers the Small Business Act, which
Hmm.
is there to benefit and support 99.9% of U.S. firms. That should
Yeah.
be a huge agency. And in reality, it's pretty much closed.
Talk to
But
me.
I'd love to reach out to some of these people at
Mhm.
the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation and ask them, what is your deal with, with
Yeah.
small business programs, right?
Right. I know the Heritage is it's a conservative bastion, and the Cato is also a conservative entity, is it not?
Yeah, but why do conservatives hate small businesses?
Well,
It's
that's what I'm asking because isn't it the height of hypocrisy? Don't they stand for supposed, individual liberties and freedoms? And sometimes they talk about, Main Street and Middle America, but as you've taught me and many others, we really don't hear the phrase small business. Why are you suspecting that the Pentagon is controlling where the federal contracts go and preventing the legally mandated amount of 23% of the contracts from going to small businesses. Why do you accuse the Pentagon?
Well, the Pentagon is omnipotent in Washington. You can find the article, Google 35 trillion Pentagon, and a story pops up on multiple websites. I think Yahoo is one of them, talking about the $35 trillion black hole.
Yeah.
The smallest number that I've ever seen of money that's missing at the Pentagon is $850 billion. That's their whole budget for the year, just about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the history of government, there's never been a federal agency that can't find an amount of money equal to their entire annual budget. That's never happened in history since George Washington was president, right?
Right.
And it's happening, today. And the Pentagon's never passed an audit. And in fact, I think one point in time, I on my X account offered $1,000 for someone to find me any member of Congress on national television objecting to all this money missing from the Pentagon, and nobody could do it, right? Quite
And
frankly, I would think there'd be like a Watergate type, nationally televised hearings. Where'd that money go?
that there is no howling in the streets about it, it proves the ignorance of it. And
Yeah,
well, not really, because you wonder, even if most Americans knew about it, do we have the time or the gumption or the energy because we're so exhausted just struggling to make ends meet? Like Bobby Kennedy said over and over in his campaign, two-thirds of America, 80% of Americans couldn't put their hands on $1,000 if they had an emergency. This is a crisis of epic proportions.
when I think about it, getting the Pentagon spending under control is probably one of the most important things we can do. See if this makes sense to you. So I'm watching TV about this guy that killed the people in New Orleans with the truck, right?
Yeah.
I've seen statistics and reports that show this. When there's a downturn in the economy and people are under pressure, to make ends meet, there's more domestic violence, there's more crime, there's more robberies. The guy that killed those people in New Orleans, I'll bet you anything you would bet he was in debt. I would bet you anything you want to bet that guy was broke and was under extreme financial pressure.
Yeah.
So, to some degree, the issue that I've worked on for 35 years to try to get the government to quit cheating small businesses,
Hmm.
I believe that if they were to finally comply with a law that was passed in 1953 and simply give small businesses that 23% of contracts, I know for a fact, by the way, it would triple the number of jobs. It would double the number of jobs at a minimum.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And create a huge economic boom in America, which would take a lot of financial pressure off the middle class. I think it would lower the crime rate. I think it would
Hmm.
lower domestic violence. I think it would lower homelessness, right?
Hmm.
So there's no
Hmm.
benefit to the American people of the government, mainly the Pentagon, opposing small business programs, right?
Right. Right.
So think about this. So the Pentagon, in my opinion, is responsible for getting in all these wars. Who wants to get in all these
Hmm.
wars? The Pentagon does, right? That's
Hmm.
what they like, right?
Hmm.
They're squandering at a minimum hundreds of billions of dollars in our tax dollars, maybe trillions, and they're anti-small business. They want to suppress the largest economic stimulus program in history. I'm going to say that again.
Yeah.
The Small Business Act is the single largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history, and the
Hmm.
Pentagon wants to suppress it. That's
Hmm.
pretty freaking evil in my mind. They want to get us into wars. They want to squander, lose, loot, steal, embezzle hundreds of billions, not trillions of dollars, and they want to suppress the only economic stimulus program for the American people. That's
Hmm.
pretty freaking evil. The Pentagon is just out of control, and their influence is all negative.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, I can't think of anything the Pentagon does that I would say
Right.
benefits the average American. I'm going to try to reach out in 2025 to everyone that's funding Cato and American Heritage and ask them just one simple question. Why are you supporting anti-small business policies when 99% of all U.S. firms are small businesses? What are you trying
Right.
to accomplish?
Right.
I bet they don't know that.
And
I'll tell you something. I bet the people who fund Cato and American Heritage don't realize that over 99% of all U.S. firms are small businesses.
and they
Only
don't
one tenth
realize.
of 1% are large businesses. I bet they don't know that.
No, nor
Right?
they probably know of the law that mandate the law that is completely ignored since 1953 to the most part. Because instead of 23% of federal contracts going to small businesses, you've taught me that it's really about 3%. And
I would
also,
think it's three. It's certainly not over five.
But I
In
want to,
fact,
but
if you consider a small business to be a company with 100 employees or less, which is a very generous definition, since that includes 98% of all U.S. firms, and if you consider the total amount the government spends,
right.
which I believe is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 trillion, yeah, legitimate small businesses have never received even 3%,
And you
certainly not even 5%.
you've said the average small business has 10 or 20 employees, right?
The average American company has 10 employees.
Wow.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
87% of all U.S. firms have 20 employees or less.
Right.
And
And is it
companies with 100 employees or less are responsible for about 98% of all net new jobs.
right? Right. And also, just talk again about the shenanigans of how either the SBA or other agencies claim that they're giving their contracts to small businesses, but what they're considering small businesses are some of the largest corporations in the world.
Google Fortune 500 firms landing federal small business contracts. Search on corporate giants reaping federal small business contracts. There's just dozens of stories. I'm sure the government has hired some PR firm to take a lot of those stories down, but there have been, I would say, over 100 stories about the fact that Fortune 500 firms get small business contracts. I'm here in my home office, and on this wall
Hmm.
is dozens of stories. Let me grab one off the wall. Hang on a second.
All right.
Can you see that? Read it.
Error diverts deals from small firms. The Seattle Post Intelligencer, for those who are just listening to the audio. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a wall of stories in every major newspaper in the country about me and my campaign to end fraud in federal small business programs. What's this? The Seattle Post Intelligence. Here's the Rocky Mountain News, the Miami Herald, San Jose Mercury News, Wall Street Journal, Chronicle, Citizen Chronicle.
Because you started digging into this and suing various agencies. You didn't just sue the Pentagon or the Defense Department, right?
Here's one that just laid on the floor. Can you see that?
Washington Times, small businesses losing U.S. deals. Size standards exceeded in federal contracts, the GAO finds. Nice. That's a
Yeah.
classic. Wow.
So, we've discussed this before, but I prompted the first federal investigation into fraud in federal small business programs around 2002. The Government Accountability Office did an investigation and found over 5,000 of the biggest companies in the world were getting small business contracts. In
Right.
fact, over 5,000 biggest companies on the planet were in the SBA's database of small businesses called ProNet.
As you've talked about lately, when you've asked the SBA, okay, you say you're giving all these contracts to small businesses. To whom have you given the contracts? Silence. Nothing. They
Yeah,
don't answer your question. They don't tell you. They
yeah.
don't show you.
Well, again, I don't want to talk about the same thing over and over, but this is what happens when you ask the government, "Can I see who gave small business contracts to?" They go, "Oh, here you go."
Yeah. Lloyd's holding up documents
This
that
is
are
what you
almost
get.
completely redacted. It
Yeah,
just looks like black screens except for a sentence or two. And those are the results of FOIA requests that you've had to sue for, and you've spent good money in order to get those documents. And then they lose in court, and then those are the documents you get, or something like that.
yeah. Here's what Federal District Court Judge William Alsop said in one of my cases against the government. Just happened to be on my table here. He said it'd be more like a David and Goliath. You get to come in there and be the underdog again against the big company, against the big government. They're trying to suppress the evidence. So, yeah, I've been in court with the government for 36 years. I'm still
Right.
in court with the government, right? But when you ask the government, can I see who's getting small business contracts? I've spent up to $900,000 in 7 years in court to try to see that. Why is that? So if the government is complying with the
Right.
Small Business Act and giving legitimate small business contracts, why do I have to spend $900,000 in 7 years in court to see it?
Right. And
Right?
why isn't it freely available to the public on a website,
It
publicly
should be.
available?
I hope that Trump and Musk can vibe it. This should be something that you can find on the internet, right? The point of this is Republicans have been anti-small business since Reagan. Reagan tries to close the SBA again. Search on Reagan tries to close the SBA. Why? By the way, they said to save money. That's ridiculous. That's
Yeah.
absurd, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
amount of money it takes to run the SBA is just pennies on the ground to the government. It's nothing, right? So let's
Right.
just say this: 850 billion is unaccounted for at the Pentagon. 850. That would run the SBA for 1,000 years at their current budget. Let's say that again. The amount of money that's missing at the Pentagon would fund the SBA at their current budget for 1,000 years. That's insane.
Well,
The
and
amount of money that Biden increased the IRS budget would run the SBA for 100 years. So the
right.
SBA is this little tiny agency that administers the largest economic stimulus program in history, right? It's
Mm,
stupid. It's stupid to oppose the only agency to support the 34 million small businesses where most Americans work. When I used to see these Trump rallies, they had one out here by my house in the Coachella. All these guys with these trucks and the big Trump flags, like that, big rallies, make America great
right,
again.
right, right.
Most of those people either own or work in a small business.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump knows that. And I don't think those people know that Trump, quite frankly, I would have to define Trump as anti small business. So when Trump took office, the SBA budget was the lowest in history. He cut it even more, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
only agency to help the 99.9% of all U.S. firms that are small businesses, he cut the budget even more. So if that's not
Right.
small business, I mean, if that's not anti-small business, what is it, right?
Right. And
So
that's the administrative budget. Let's say it was doubled or tripled or whatever. That's half the battle. The other half, the other part of the problem is getting a president to enforce the law that 23% of its budgets spent through other agencies gets steered to America's small businesses. This is a fine issue for more Americans beyond health, beyond the wars, beyond everything else to pick up and just batter your congressmen and your senators to learn about this, to go to the ASBL.com, verify that this is all true, get as outraged as Lloyd and I about it, and get to work, people, because only we can save ourselves.
you know what? This week, I've seen three different organizations raising money for wounded veterans. Three. There's Wounded Warriors, and the other two, I can't think their name.
Right.
Why are wounded veterans having to go on TV and beg for money from the public? That's what the Pentagon's for. That's what the Veteran Administration is for, right? None of this is
Wow.
logical and reasonable, right? The small business issue that I talk about is just a sample of how corrupt the government is and how poorly it's run. I
Yep.
take it back, not poorly run. That'd be something that's stupid. It's evil. It's
Yep.
corrupt.
Yep.
It,
Yeah.
it's it's it's
It,
it's destroying
it's
our
a
country.
it's a treason. It's a betrayal of everything that it's supposed to be. Now I want to take full responsibility. Anyone can try and steal from me. Shame on me if I don't protect myself. Shame on me if I'm not on guard. Shame on me if I want to just keep my head in the sand and if I don't speak up against evils. And I'm speaking on behalf of all Americans, Lloyd, because there's also the hope. If we take responsibility as a failed citizenry who has let our government get corrupt, as all governments are wont to do, as history teaches us and the founders taught us, the buck stops right here with us. We've got to educate each other, and we have got to demand that our representatives work for us with accountability and transparency. Otherwise, we have no power to just sit and complain like, oh, look what they're doing, look what they're doing, look what they're doing. I'm not accusing you of this, Lloyd. You are raising the alarm about something that I don't hear anybody else raising the alarm about. Thank you.
I tell you, that drives me crazy. I don't understand. I think I'm the only person in the country. What is there, 300 million people? Why am I the only person that realizes that when we allow the largest economic stimulus program in history to be subverted and dismantled, that's a bad idea?
And
I don't get it.
forgotten.
There should
Yeah.
be 1,000 people like me, right? But
But,
it is crazy. It's just maddening to think I'm the only guy.
well,
Lloyd
Bobby
Chapman, I'm
Kent.
75. I've been doing this stuff for 36 years.
Amen.
And if I stop doing it, there's nobody.
Bobby Kennedy
There's
met
nobody.
you. You met Bobby Kennedy Jr. last year at an event. And
Yeah.
before long, he invited you on his podcast. And for a half an hour, he picked your brain to learn everything that you teach in all of our shows. And people can and should go to YouTube and search Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Lloyd Chapman. Looking forward to, the inauguration 2 or 3 weeks. What are your hopes for this month, next month, and this year?
I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed and hope that these guys, can add 99.9% of every business in America is a small business. They're responsible for half the gross domestic product, half the private sector workforce. Get
Yep.
this, over 90% of all U.S. exports, over 90% of U.S. exports. the most important thing is, I've said it before, and I say it every time you hear me talking, 98% of all net new jobs. I was at an event, gosh, when Bush Sr. was president, and he was told the story. He was sitting in bed with his wife, Barbara Bush, and he was reading the newspaper, and she starts crying. She said, George, I was at a hospital today where babies are born with AIDS. You got to do something about that. And explained to her that there's not enough money for everything. Yeah, we've got babies being born with AIDS. We've still got, veterans from World War, II and Korea and Vietnam and Desert Storm, those kind of stuff, right? We've got hurricane victims. They got all these problems, and there's just not enough money. The Government Accountability Office did a report recently. It says 34% of the largest, most successful companies in America pay zero federal income tax. I've seen stories repeatedly that dozens of Fortune 500 pay no tax. Who's paying those taxes? It's small businesses, right? So here we are with a program to support and boost the middle class economy, where apparently it has to be most of the tax revenues come from small business. It has to be, right?
Yeah.
Because Fortune 500 aren't paying it, right?
Right.
So it's just sort of like the mentality in Washington and
Right.
mentality of the Republican Party
Right.
is that I think it could destroy our country.
If we're not already destroyed, we're almost hoping against hope. My one trick pony type of thing is for more individuals to get personally involved, is to confirm these claims. Start at the ASBL.com. Start at your don'tcheatwomen.com for another angle or, deeper, perspective on it. And recognize that we have to go to alternative media and reporters to learn more truths, because the mainstream will never tell anybody these realities about small businesses and what the SBA is supposed to do and the percentage of contracts that are supposed to go to small businesses.
99% of U.S. firms for small businesses. They create 98% of the jobs and most of the tax revenue. It's insane. It's anti-American. It's stupid to oppose programs to support those companies and the agency that's there to help them. It's stupid. If Trump becomes the first Republican pro-small business president and adopts the economic stimulus program that Biden came out with, it will double and triple the number of new jobs and increase tax revenue for free. No new taxes, no new spending, deficit neutral, just comply with the 1953 Small Business Act. So they're voting to give hundreds of billions of dollars to foreign governments, but they're opposed to the Small Business Administration and programs to support the small businesses where most of their constituents work. It makes no sense. So yeah, everyone needs to realize that our economy is based upon small businesses, and we need to support the Small Business Administration and all federal programs for small businesses. We don't need fewer programs for small businesses. We need more.
Yep. If
The law
99%
actually,
of businesses are small businesses, why isn't 99% of the budget going to small
yeah.
businesses?
So the government claims they're giving small business 23. That's a complete bullshit.
Mm.
Well, let's just say that that's accurate. Well, we know from the Census Bureau that's accurate, that 99.9% of all U.S. firms are small businesses. If they comply with the law, that means 0.1% get 77% of all federal contracts, and 99.9% of American companies get 23. That's right there is insane.
Yeah.
The small business actually says, I think it says a fair portion. I bet I could go to a federal judge and say, hi, judge, 0.1% of U.S. companies are large businesses and 99.9% are small. What percentage do you think should go to small business? I think he'd probably say at least 50. What Trump should do, he needs to give the SBA a budget that's at least $25 billion a year, open up all the offices that have been closed, and reinvigorate all the programs, because quite frankly, that is the only way to make America great again. There's no other way to do it. Reopen the SBA that a series of Republican presidents have closed, reinvigorate that agency, and start giving small businesses, the 23%, the minimum, and he should probably shoot for 33% and adopt Bobby Kennedy's economic stimulus program. It would triple the number of new jobs, probably almost end homelessness, and generate a lot more tax revenue.
What would you add to our conversation today, Lloyd?
People need to get scared. You need to get scared. We're headed for a complete economic collapse. Elon Musk says that. Lloyd Chapman says that. A lot of smart people saying that. It's at our current path, it's unavoidable. And people need to start caring about that. Now
Wow.
they talk about the mainstream media. You
Yeah.
cannot find any stories of the mainstream media about this.
No.
There's no stories of the mainstream media about America going bankrupt.
Right.
There's no stories of the mainstream media about how stupid it is for Republicans to be anti-small business. There's no stories about the fact that 99.9% of U.S. firms are small businesses.
Right.
There's no reporting on this issue. It's a complete blackout for some reason, right?
That's the gift you've given America with the American Small Business League, ASBL.com. And people can and should follow Lloyd Chapman on X because you tweet voluminously with nice, short, shareable little clips that are commentary on current events, but also the urgency of these issues.
Yep.
So I definitely want to thank you, Lloyd. I think we've captured a great show. It's January 2nd. Again, Happy New Year to you, Lloyd. Happy
Happy
New
New Year
Year,
to everybody.
everybody watching and listening. And thank you all very much.